Tātou katoa, ko te mea tūtahi ka mihi ata hou. Ei nā tangata hui tātou e tēnei ata. Ka ranga mai, mihi mai kia koutou, ta koutou, mai aha e tēnei rā. Ka mihi oki, ei nā tangata hui tātou ko roa hiko hui. Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora. I'm Spencer Lilley. I'm an associate professor at the School of Information Management at Victoria University of Wellington, Te Rōpū Whakahau. I specialise in the area of Indigenous information behaviour, and I have tribal affiliations to Te Atiawa, Taranaki whānui, who are the mana whenua of this particular region here in Wellington, Muaūpoko, who are up around the Levin area, and Ngāpuhi that dominate the north. So that's my background. In talking today, I think it's probably also worthwhile to note that I am not an information architect, but I am a heavy user of your products. Before I became an academic, I worked in libraries for about 20-something years. I sort of lost count after a while. But when I actually started, we didn't have online catalogues. We didn't have the internet. I learned the analog way how to find information. So really in those days, we had card catalogues. For those that are too young to sort of remember those days, 3 3/4-inch cards that gave you an author or title index or a subject access. So that was the main way of finding information in a library. If you were looking for literature that had been published in journals, you typically either used an index and abstract service and then had to go to the actual print copy of the journal if you were lucky enough to have it in the library. And given I worked in large libraries, we typically had a lot of the journals that featured in our indexes and abstracts. So really, in a lot of ways, when the internet came in the 1990s, or mid to late 1990s, it really revolutionized the way that we could actually assist our clients to find the information that they needed. But of course, a lot has changed since then. In a sense, a lot of the products weren't networked in those days. So they could only use them in the library. So not off campus or elsewhere on campus. And so, the library was still the place that people had to come to. And as the years have gone on, we see fewer people having to go into buildings because they can access everything pretty much from their desktop. So that's my background. Really, by learning to use tools the old way, using card catalogues and books, really was a very good way of being trained to use electronic resources once they became available. So today, my focus is on Indigenous wayfinding, and sort of looking, when Sarah first approached me to give this presentation, I thought, what am I going to be talking about to this group? And so I actually had to go away and do some searching to find out what really was what I could offer to this audience. So fortunately, ChatGPT it was very helpful in that sense. So told my students not to use it, but they have to do as I say, not as I do. So I'm going to talk about Indigenous wayfinding in a Mātauranga Māori context. And in terms of what Mātauranga Māori is, if we have some international members in the audience, that is really basically translates as Māori knowledge. So it's a Māori knowledge system that encompasses traditional and contemporary knowledge that has evolved over centuries. It's a knowledge system that is multidisciplinary and also interdisciplinary. So it covers a broad range of subjects that we would normally consider to be of interest: history, geography, science, etc. And those things can interact with each other to sort of help provide the knowledge. Before there was contact between Europeans and Māori, it was very much a knowledge system that focused on oral transmission. Māori were pre-literate, but knowledge was also contained in other formats, artistically, in the carving, the painting, using natural colours made from the barks of trees, etc. Weaving, so those types of arts, musically through song and through performance, and the use of names, both as place names and personal names, which helped us remember people important people from the past and also important events. So all those factors were part of the knowledge system. Also, there's a strong interconnectedness between humans and the environment. And this is seen through the concept of whakapapa, which is what people would typically refer to as genealogy. And whakapapa actually means putting one layer on top of each other. So, if you're looking at a family tree, that's effectively what you're doing. The other important factor about Mātauranga Māori was the use of language. I must say, language is very important in any knowledge system. To fully understand the knowledge, you really have to have a strong understanding of the language as well. And with Te Reo Māori, it's a very lyrical language. A lot of what we see in public these days is translations, but if you actually look at those translations, quite often the Māori translation against the English version is a lot shorter because it can be said with less words or with more meaningful words. Sometimes it will be longer because there will be a lot to say about that particular subject, but don't ever think that the English and the Māori are equivalent, because it's not always a translation, it's an interpretation. Mātauranga Māori is the generic name that we give Māori knowledge systems, but there's also another term, Mātauranga iwi, and that refers to the knowledge that individual tribes have. Before contact, there was no such thing as Māori, really, and the word Māori means normal or ordinary. In comparison to people that they were meeting, Māori were identified by that particular title, but people always identify themselves by the iwi, the tribes, and the hapu, or the sub-tribes that they belong to. And we'll find that those groupings have different forms of knowledge. So it's really important that, when you're sort of putting things in the context of Indigenous wayfinding, you put it in the context of the knowledge system that you're working with. Now, here in Aotearoa, Māori, sort of are the Indigenous people, and although there are variations across the different tribal groupings, we can sort of think of the general concept of Mātauranga Māori itself as opposed to iwi. But in other countries like Australia, Canada, and the USA, as other examples of countries that were also sort of colonized in around the same periods. Of course, there's many other peoples that are quite different to each other, although they all get landed under the one label of either Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders or First Nations or Native Americans or American Indians. But each of them are a nation in their own right and have their own knowledge system. So it's very important to understand what knowledge system you're actually working with. So looking at Indigenous wayfinding, it's really looking at the application of that traditional knowledge, the values of that particular community and their customary practices, including, and those include things like belief systems and the behavior that people have towards each other and expect from each other. And using that, that's what forms the basis of what you should be looking at when you're designing and organising the digital environments that you're working in. And an important part of that is that, I guess, it's that recognition that there is going to be a difference to what you would expect to see in a European context, or what people commonly refer to as a Western perspective. But so those unique perspectives are going to be different ways that people have of accessing the knowledge. So understanding what those access needs are, whether in terms of the values and the language, as well as understanding how knowledge is classified and organised. So I was talking about whakapapa before and the interconnectedness, and that is based on the premise that all things are descended from Ranganui, from the sky, and Papatūānuku, the Earth Mother, and their various offspring are interrelated, and they are the god of their various domains. So you should be able to do a whakapapa, a genealogical chart showing how humans are related to, you know, sort of like second, third, fourth cousins of all those elements that are living. So it's understanding that, you know, that interconnectedness is important. And whether you believe in those types of creation stories or not, I think it's still a very good way of looking at things. You know, what we do will impact on everything else in the environment that we're around, and particularly, you know, in an era where we're much more aware of the impact that we can have on the climate. So design really does need to be respectful as well as meaningful. So in other words, sort of putting it in a context in which it is going to be appreciated and is going to be meaningful for the way that people work their way through the system that you're building. So that will include the cultural practices and those values and beliefs that we were talking about, ensuring that, you know, sort of those are put in a context where they are understood by those wanting to access them, and most importantly, looking at how you use language and Indigenous symbols or visual cues. So the really important thing about this is sort of really building relationships with the people that you're building the architecture for, and sort of really ensuring that you've got their input. So, getting them involved very early rather than designing something and expecting them to be happy with it at the end. There's a chance they will be happy with it, but they'll be happier in sort of seeing the plans and being involved in the plans rather than giving the final tick of approval. If you don't build those relationships, sometimes you will find that you haven't built the site in the way that people would expect to be able to use it. So when I'm looking at websites particularly, and I know that information architects are more involved than just building websites, but this is the thing that I do, and I've sort of done it for a few projects that I've been involved in. I go and sort of look at how those websites appeal to someone that hasn't used them before, that is looking to see how a particular organisation or institution is promoting themselves and is inclusive of Māori concepts and culture. So one of the first things I look at is how, if at all, that site uses Te Reo Māori. And looking at how the menu tracks. So what we see in a lot of websites is that it looks like there's bilingual access. So you've got tabs or labels that you can choose to search on. But as soon as you go down one layer, it totally disappears. So you're back into English only. Other things I look at is how the language has been treated or sort of been displayed, including the macrons, seeing whether they're present, and if they are present, do they look natural? I see in a lot of websites where the macronized A or E sort of stands out because it's bolded or in a different sort of font style to the rest of the font. Also, the accuracy of the information and the language that's there, particularly around things like transliterations, which the Māori Language Commission is trying to get people to go away from and to use more natural language that hasn't depended on being translated from English. Other things I look at are to do with Māori focused content, what content is there and how it is represented on the site, looking for imagery that photos or of if it's an organisation that provides services, are Māori sort of featured on the website. If you are looking at the staff profile, where you can see profiles of the Māori staff and clients who use those services or provide them, and contact information for those people. The other thing is around search processes and the use of advanced search options and the application of metadata that is going to mean that you find the Māori content that is within those sites. And I have to say that, so I've done this for a number of organisations, both here and overseas, where I was doing the same on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island stuff in Australia. And I have to say that, so the scores aren't all that great all the time. So I talked a bit earlier about how libraries used to describe information. So these days, it's all integrated into the integrated library management system. And so we use various subject headings and metadata to be able to make those items available. This has become even more possible with digital items. Libraries are still required to have some uniformity in terms of describing books and journals and other types of resources like that. But when it comes to digital items, items that have either been digitized or are digitally born, there's a lot more scope for adding extra information, including greater descriptions of the content that is in those particular images. So it's actually finding the items that are putting the information in that people are going to look for. And particularly if you're talking about digital images like photography, looking at who the people are, who they represent. So looking at iwi names, looking at the names of important people or just anyone that's in that photograph, or the location, using either the English name or the Māori name, so that people can actually find that. And it's not always possible to do that. And part of the problem, I guess, is that there's a lot of information that has been digitized that has not been described adequately. And therefore it becomes very hard for people to find that. And, it's actually giving priority to those things. So in terms of our cultural heritage organisations, we've got, sort of a lot of Mātauranga Māori materials yet fully described. And it's actually sort of giving priority to those to actually make the most of the resources. They are much more accessible than they were before when they were sitting in one physical place, but they do need a lot more in the terms of tagging and metadata and subject headings. Libraries in New Zealand are now using their own Māori thesaurus, which has been developed over the last 10 years, which provides much more intuitive subject access for people that have and the idea of Te Reo Māori and how it relates to various cultural subjects. And we haven't got time to look at it now, but that's the URL for it. And I'd recommend that you go and look at it and see, look at the types of ways that those headings have been used. So really what I've been trying to say is that, you need to know your knowledge system. You need to build relationships with people, and you got to continue having that involvement with the community and having them involved in your activities, and making sure that when you're using language that you're using it properly, and I guess also make it flexible, more flexible, so that when you are changing between languages, you don't go right back to the beginning of the home screen. Now, just as an example of what I was talking about before, about sort of trying to find things. These photos you can see were taken at the same time. The one on the left can be found quite easily using the search terms. The one on the right, the person at the back is my great-grandfather, and next to him is my great-grandmother. Now, using their names, I can find them in that photo, but I can't find them in that photo yet. They've both been taken on the same day. They're both images from one particular institution. And it just shows that, sort of, there's still not that consistency in the way that they're being used. So I've got a whole other range of examples, but I just thought that this was a simple one. So people, when they look in a Māori context, often look for a particular name that they can relate to. And there's a lot of names associated with the photo on the left and none with the photo on the right, even though all the names of the people on the right are in the information about the photos on the left. But you only find that photo if you know how else to find it, using a different search term. So that's all I was going to say today. I know I've gone a little bit later than I had, but intended, but there'll be time for questions afterwards, I think. Yeah. So thank you.